Welcome to Fear the Old Lore, where we examine the English and Japanese versions of Bloodborne to gain a better understanding of the lore. In this episode, we'll examine blood, how it's connected to the dead, and how Old Blood is used as an umbrella term for the various types of blood found throughout the game. Let's begin. After the player is administered blood for the first time, a beast appears as though luring the meek into the depths, before abruptly bursting into flames and dying. Shortly after, messengers appear crawling over the player's body, dragging them into unconsciousness. This cutscene symbolizes that beasthood is always a threat, but it seems the messengers can prevent it and connect the player to the dream.
You found yourself a hunter.
Messenger comes from Shisha in Japanese, and while it does mean messenger, it shares the same pronunciation as Shisha, which means dead or deceased person. This was likely an intended play on words meant to link messengers to spirits of the dead. But if messengers are supposed to be figuratively and literally synonymous with the dead, what's their connection to blood and blood ministration? In Japanese, Coldblood is called shiketsu, which is a made-up word that literally breaks down to dead blood or death blood. Coldblood contains blood echoes, or chi no ishi, the dying wills of blood. These dying wills embody the hopes, dreams, and desires of the dead. Hunters can inherit their dying wills and become invigorated by them. The wills in the blood tie into the HP stat, which is described as the power or will to survive. If this falls to 0, your strength will fade away. While this form of will is closer to willpower in meaning and differs from someone's dying will, the two are probably meant to be synonymous. As stated earlier, the dying will portion of blood echoes comes from ishi. However, just like with how shisha can be used to mean messenger or dead person, ishi can also mean will as in willpower, intentions or motivation, as well as someone's dying wishes. These variations of ishi are used somewhat interchangeably in the game. The doll says she'll channel dying wishes to strengthen our will, and the quick description for the air rune uses chi no ishi as in wills of blood instead of dying wishes of blood for some reason. It may have been a typo or character conversion error on the part of the developers, but nonetheless, there's an explicit connection between the two forms of ishi based on the doll's dialogue alone. When the hunter uses blood echoes to level up, they're strengthening their own willpower with the wills of the dead. Using blood vials to restore HP means the hunter is essentially regaining the will to live and survive by becoming invigorated by the dead's will to live again. Only by having enough willpower can the player overcome the obstacles on their journey to complete the game. It's a meta theme shared in common amongst the Soulsborne titles. One doesn't necessarily need to level up to beat the game, they just need the will to persevere in the face of great hardships. It's part of the rationale for being able to challenge the Great Ones at Blood Level 4, or Link the Flame at Soul Level 1 in Dark Souls. Willpower is akin to greatness. Messengers are spirits or souls of the dead, and likely represent the dying wills or blood echoes within the blood. It might sound obvious to the point where it's a joke, but another way to think about it would be that blood echoes are like the souls of Bloodborne. Literally. These souls aren't limited to being found in blood vials and Coldblood, though. They can even be seen in items like the Executioner's Gloves, Logarius Wheel, and Ritual Blood. One of the most fascinating things about the Executioner's Gloves and the Logarius Wheel is that since both have been soaked in blood, they've been imbued with special, arcane properties. Since the Logarius Wheel was used on Vile Bloods, it would make sense for it to have gained magic properties through their blood, but the case of the Executioner's Gloves is a little more troubling. Many assume the Executioner's Gloves are affiliated with the Healing Church's brand of executioners because of its name. It's a little unintuitive, but its description hints this is not the case since they come from a faraway land. Considering its proximity to Canehurst, it's unlikely this faraway land was supposed to refer to Yharnam. The Japanese is a bit clearer in that the gloves don't use the same suffix that's used for the Healing Church's Executioner Squad, meaning they're unrelated. If the Executioner's Gloves are foreign to Yharnam, if the blood soaked into it exhibits similar features to what's in Yharnam blood, it would have incredible implications about how the blood works in Bloodborne. Coating an object with blood, or absorbing it directly, may allow the residual wills or spirits within it to inhabit or possess whatever the blood comes into contact with. If true, it would imply the endemic plaguing Yharnam could be reproduced in other areas given the right set of circumstances. The more exposure to the spirits or wills in the blood, the greater its power becomes. This principle is visualized through two sources, Ritual Blood and Cold Blood. As the tiers of Ritual Blood increase, the skeletal figures rising up from it become more and more clearly defined. In Cold Blood, the more concentrated the echoes become, the closer it becomes to literal greatness, with the highest tier belonging to Great One Coldblood. There is a very high likelihood the two are the same. Both have the spirits of the dead within them, and ritual blood is described as being incoagulable, meaning it doesn't clot. Part of the reason Coldblood gets its name is because it doesn't clot. It remains blood, or liquid even when found in a cold, dead body. Ritual blood, cold blood, and blood vials are all likely different terms for the old blood. The reason they're called different things is probably due to how they're used. It's similar to how a piece of fabric can be called a cloth, towel, bandana, rug, carpet, etc., depending on its function. Thus, old blood used in rituals is called ritual blood, old blood found in dead bodies is called cold blood, and bottles filled with old blood are called blood vials. The strongest piece of evidence supporting this idea comes from two sources, though they share the same Japanese text. The Thumaru Chalice states, "Let the chalice reveal the tomb of the gods, let blood be the hunter's nourishment, and let ye partake in communion." Whereas Gehrman says,
"A holy chalice will reveal the tomb of the gods, where hunters partake in communion."
Gehrman's English dialogue was probably altered to sound more natural when spoken aloud, but their subtle differences can imply different things. Gehrman's line skipped the part about the blood being the nourishment of hunters and makes it sound as though the hunters partake in communion in the tombs. The Thumaru chalice is more ambiguous in that it could imply it's the tombs or the chalices themselves which make communion possible. The latter interpretation aligns more closely with the Japanese, which when translated more literally is something closer to, "Holy chalices exhume the tombs of the gods. Their blood becomes the sustenance of hunters and bestows communion." It's difficult to convey the nuance, but the Japanese is clearer in that it's the blood of the chalices which hunters partake communion and receive nourishment from. As a quick translation note, the term used for communion is seitai, which literally means holy body, but it's used for the Eucharist, which is the symbolic body and blood of Christ consumed in Holy Communion. In real life, chalices are used to hold the sacramental wine symbolizing the blood of Christ, so the imagery of drinking blood from a chalice is paralleled in the communion of Bloodborne as well. The blood which fills or satiates these chalices and opens the tombs of the gods is none other than ritual blood, which would mean the blood hunters partake communion from is ritual blood. Its power comes from the number of spirits dwelling within it and is tied to death. Sleep is often used as a metaphor for death, and in Bloodborne, dreams and nightmares act as a kind of middle ground between waking and sleeping or life and death. Blood can symbolize both life and death, as blood is needed to survive, yet bleeding can be a sign of death. In Bloodborne, blood serves as a conduit between dimensions, linking the waking world to the hunter's dream and the nightmares, which serve as a kind of afterlife within the game. Cold blood reinforces the connections between blood, dreams, and nightmares. As the amounts of blood echoes become more concentrated within it, it begins to resemble a cosmic nightmare, with Great One Coldblood described as being cosmically nightmarish. Conversely, in areas like the Hunter's Nightmare and the Nightmare Frontier, we can see what appears to be blood coming out of the tombstones that have been broken open. This could suggest that the nightmares themselves are composed of blood or blood echoes. The appearance of the rock columns in the nightmares may align with the shapes of bloodstone shards and chunks. One piece of evidence supporting this claim is that wandering nightmares all drop bloodstone shards or gems once they're defeated. It may imply blood exists at the very core of the nightmares. In Bloodborne, dreams and nightmares have the power to transcend death. The hunter, who is sustained by the dream and the wills of the dead, has mastery over death for the night of the hunt. Instead of being killed or dying, they will lose consciousness and awaken anew, as if it were all a bad dream. The Yharnam Stone reveals that while the cosmically nightmarish beings known as Great Ones can be killed and their bodies destroyed, their consciousness can persist in sleep or dreams. The mechanics of how a Great One continues to exist despite being killed are a mystery. One explanation could be that the strength of their wills is so great they're able to retain their identities beyond death. Another could be that their minds operate on transcendental planes of thought beyond the nightmares. While Great Ones may have had their wills strengthened by blood echoes since they all dropped them upon death, their consciousness remains distinct from their dying wills, showing they truly have transcended humanity to some degree. This leads us to an important question. Are the Great Ones great because it's in their nature to be so, or are they great because the blood echoes made them so? We'll probably never have a proper answer to the question, but it's fun to consider nonetheless. To summarize, the Old Blood is connected to the spirits or the wills of the dead and is used as an umbrella term for describing things like blood vials, ritual blood, and cold blood. The blood is tied to the dreams and nightmares, which serve as a kind of afterlife. Great ones are also related to nightmares, and in the case of the moon presence, its proximity alone is enough to blur the lines between the nightmare and the waking world. As the lines of reality become blurred, it causes people to go mad or transform in uncontrollable numbers. There's still more to cover in relation to the blood, but in the interest of limiting the focus of this video, it's probably best to conclude things here. We'll revisit the topic in the future, but for now, I hope the nature of the Old Blood has been made clearer and easier to understand. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking this video or subscribing to my channel. Thank you for watching. Fear the Old Lore.